Hello everyone, my name is Jason Krantz and this is a report on the search for fresh water in Bermuda. This class is for Environment 665, Water Resource Management. The instructor is Mindy Armistead, PhD. Okay, let's get started. First off, this Bermuda, oh my goodness, what a beautiful place. Bermuda is an island. It's located off in the North Atlantic Ocean, and it's only about 20 square miles in size. It is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Now, Bermuda has some very interesting characteristics. It is very densely populated. There are a lot of people on a very small island living there. It is semi-tropical, meaning that it never frosts, it never freezes. So you have a very temperate climate. And we're going to talk about those ranges here. See the average high temperature in the peak of the summertime, only 85 degrees. Lows in the winter in the mid 50s. So you can see there's a very small range of temperatures in Bermuda. This is one of the major attractions for this area. Now, also we're talking about rainfall. So obviously we're looking at Bermuda for the kind of rain, and so we need to know, well, how much does it rain there? Well, actually it rains quite a bit. It rains about 59 inches a year. Now there are obviously areas that have more or less, but in comparison, if you look at 59 inches compared to say West Virginia is only about 44 inches. So there's plenty of rain there. So look at some of the challenges they have. Bermuda has challenges because there are no lakes, there are no streams, there are no rivers, no reservoirs anywhere on the island. Part of that is due to the very low elevation. There are no mountains. You know, the elevation of the island is very minor. And we're going to look at that in a little more detail in just a moment. Now, I mentioned earlier there's 65,000 people. There's a pretty good size amount of people, 65,000 on this small island. And another important piece to remember about the challenges in Bermuda is that it is a limestone base. And limestone is very challenging to work through. And that's part of the reason why they have some challenges, and you'll hear about those. So let's look at the elevation part first. So this map shows you the island. And so this is basically Bermuda is a series of islands that are connected by little bridges. And so you can see here this map, I've blown up the graph for you, and it shows you that the very top, the highest peak is only 76 meters. That is not very tall, but the average is in the 30s. So if you look at this map, you've got some areas here in Town Hill, Berry Hill, some of these other mountains, and this little white area is just showing you the very pinnacle of the mountainsides. And if those are the only places that are in the 70s and 60s, the rest of the island you can see is a very low elevation, meaning that's why they have no rivers. There's just no hillside for the water to run down. Now, we're talking about the next piece. So we say, okay, how do we fix these problems? We don't have any rivers. We have no way to collect the water. So let's find a way to collect it ourselves. So what they've done is pretty brilliant. They have designed all of their homes to be water collection devices. And so you can see in this picture here on the right, we have a typical home in Bermuda. You had a lovely background there of the seawater, but that's not what we need. We need rainwater. We need fresh water. So you can look at this house and you can see they have little dividers that keep the water and slow it down. And then once you slide they terrace the home on the roof, and then you have these things called roof glides. The roof glides are what direct the water down into pipes. Now, the pipes And the collection devices are very interesting. If you look back to the beginning of Bermuda, when they started looking into these problems, they didn't have real sophisticated ways of collecting the water. So they had this roof idea, and then they would take the roof water and they would drain it down into what's called this rum puncheon. And basically, Bermuda is a very big rum producer. They do a lot of rum here. And they drink a lot of rum, and a lot of the restaurants serve rum, and so they have lots of rum barrels. And that's basically what a puncheon is. And so all these houses would set up multiple puncheons in their backyard to collect the rainwater, and then they would use that for all different purposes. Now that's kind of an old style way, but it's kind of interesting. Now let's talk about how we collect water. Now, freshwater collection in Bermuda, here's a typical way. First off, water is evaporated or transpiration. You can see in this graph on the right, you evaporate with transpiration into the clouds. The clouds build up, move into rain. The rain comes down on top of the homes. They collect all the water that comes onto the roofs, goes down through their gutters, and into a water storage collection device. Now, typically, they don't use those rum puncheons anymore. They have underground water storage devices. So these water storage devices will collect the water, and then they will have pumps that pump the water up into the home. And then the resident uses the water as they need. The water is then used and then moved into a wastewater situation. So we have wastewater comes through the toilets, as for example, down through other pipes into the sewage, and then they use what's called a cesspit. Now it's very similar to a septic tank, but it has some differences. A cesspit, and then all of the wastewater goes into the cesspit and is dispersed into the ground. And then once it disperses into the ground, it moves into the island. And the island doesn't have a traditional groundwater. They have what's called a freshwater lens. And you can see that that's this bottom piece down here, a freshwater lens. Now we're going to talk about that next. So a freshwater lens is, in this graph you can see in this image, you have an island, you have the sea all around it. And then of course you have dirt. And so the seawater will permeate through the dirt in many cases. And there is a pocket of water underneath the island. This is what's called a lens. Now this pocket is water that's been rain that's come down through the soil and has been collected underneath the island. And many times residents will drill holes, just like we do in America, and they'll put um, and they'll tap into the water, into the lens. Now, a lot of times this is also reserved for government. The Bermudan government is very particular about who connects to the freshwater lens under the island, and so they do keep a close eye on that. But the seawater and the freshwater never mix because the density of the freshwater is different than the density of the seawater. And so even though they can come right up onto each other, they don't blend. And that's pretty fascinating. And that helps to keep a freshwater acceptable and obtainable in the area. Now, the next piece I want to mention, we mentioned those things called cesspits. Now, cesspits, part of the reason they use this is because it's very challenging to build sewage treatment pipes. In America, we build a pipe and we move the waste through pipes into our treatment facilities. Well, because the island is made of limestone, it's very challenging to lay pipe. And so the island, for the most part, has cesspits to collect wastewater. Now, in this picture, you can see here's the house. The wastewater comes down through the pipe and it goes into the cesspit on this first side. You can see here all the the harder types of the sediment, the stuff that falls through the wastewater. And then as the wastewater goes and it goes to the higher, it rolls over this piece, and then once it's full, it will escape out the cesspit drainage into a leach bed. But you can see that's an example of a cesspit. Now, some of the challenges because of these numbers of cesspits in Bermuda are due to the number of people. You know, I keep talking about a large number of people that live on the island. Well, let me give you an example. Every, 20 square miles is not very big. But imagine you have 65,000 people on 20 square miles. We're talking about over 3,000 people per square mile. So sometimes every one of these homes will have its own individual cesspit. And if people build cesspits too close to their water storage location, a house may have a cesspit on one side, and then right next door to it, it's got its underwater storage container. If that cesspit would not be performing properly and leaking wastewater into your sewage container, that would be very terrible. That would be very damaging. That would put wastewater back into the freshwater system. And that's obviously a sad situation. So these cesspits, they require a lot of maintenance. They require you to keep up with what's going on. You need to clean them. You need to make sure they're functioning properly and keep them away from your water storage. Pretty fascinating. Now, we're obviously looking here for fresh water. So we've talked about a couple of ways. We've talked about rain collection, and that's one way. We've talked about lens or groundwater or freshwater lenses. That's how they can get water. But in 2007, the Bermudan government decided, hey, we need a desalination plant. So they put through the paperwork, and in 2008, they started to build the desalination plant in Bermuda. Now, this is a big undertaking. The plant can make up to 600,000 gallons of fresh water a day. And the plant is using it's the type of plant, it's a reverse osmosis plant. So it's very electric intensive, but it does produce a lot of water. And that's what the island needs. With all those inhabitants there, they need a considerable amount of fresh water on hand to function well. And so that plant's been in circulation for several years now, and is working well for the island. So in conclusion, freshwater at last. With the tapping of the groundwater lens, with the better control of rainwater by using good roof systems, good water storage devices, and cesspits that are properly maintained. Then, with the addition of the seawater desalination plant in 2008, that has finally given Bermuda the kind of water they need in order to sustain the area. There are times when they still run low, and so they do have conservation times that the government will tell the inhabitants to keep close a watch on. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. Bermuda is on the right path now to proper fresh water and Bermuda. I appreciate you listening and thank you for your time. Good day.